Well, my first thoughts were that it was absolutely shocking, really. I don't think there's any words to describe the violence that was unleashed on various communities and the fear that it has put in many people who could not go on with their day-to-day lives. Unfortunately, though, having studied these issues for many years now, I was not surprised. This had been bubbling under the surface for a very long time, and I think what it needed was a spark, and the spark was this horrific attack in Southport and the misinformation that followed. So I think what we need to be careful with now is analyzing where this comes from, really, and we cannot just stop at the idea that it is just a few bad eggs on the extreme right, a few violent thugs, the way they've been described by the Prime Minister, for example, and the government, or that it's just misinformation online on social media or from foreign actors. I think we also need to take a really, really serious look at our mainstream politics and our mainstream media and the way many far-right ideas have been mainstream over the past few years, few decades, when it comes to the way we talk about immigration, the way we talk about refugees, asylum seekers, Islam, but also trans rights, for example.
So it's a combination of years of what you mentioned, including disinformation you have said that has been spread. Can you tell us how is this disinformation being spread and what is being believed?
Well, misinformation is spread in various ways. Of course, we have a role of social media, and nowadays we can see that many other platforms that are sharing a lot of information are no longer moderated the way they should be. Moderation used to be much, much stricter, and it wasn't enough already, but it used to be much stricter. And since Elon Musk has taken over X, formerly known as Twitter, what we've seen is actually things getting a lot worse. And what we're seeing is a lot of kind of really extreme right figures having come back to Twitter, but also Meta and other social media spreading lies, spreading hate, and this needs to be tackled. But that's just not enough, I'm afraid, because what we've seen as well is a lot of kind of misinformation, or at least far-right discourse being spread in our mainstream media. What we've seen as well is far-right ideas being euphemized in mainstream media, being called populist, for example, as opposed to being called racist or far-right, and being described as a threat to democracy that they are. And what we're seeing today really is clearly what a threat to democracy and to various communities they are.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, you've posted on social media about the hypocrisy of two British newspapers. How much of a role have traditional media had to play in all of this?
That's right. I mean, I think it's appalling to see headlines today from some of the tabloid media here who have been fueling anti-immigrant hatred, who have been fueling Islamophobia for many, many years, who have been warned about the consequences about this kind of discourse, who are not turning around and thanking the anti-racist demonstrators who have been vilified for many years in many ways. For example, the protests in support of Palestinian people were considered hate marches by these very newspapers, and they are the same people who were yesterday defending businesses, defending communities in the streets of many cities, whether it's Brighton, Bristol, London, and so on. So, I think there is a massive amount of hypocrisy here. And I think the people who have a particular privileged access to shaping public discourse need to take a good look at themselves, because these ideas do not come from nowhere. These ideas do not just come from the extreme right. They are fueled by the way the mainstream deals with them.
How are far-right groups using social media to organise themselves?
Well, I think this is very, this is very scary in a way, because I think there's a new stage here. We used to have organization that used to kind of centrally organize these kind of protests, like the English Defence League, for example. Nowadays, things are a lot more fluid, and we don't really have, really centralized actors who are doing this. Of course, there are key figures that remain, who are spokespeople, but it's a very kind of fluid environment, and it's really hard to pinpoint actually where the threat comes from. And we can see, and we saw very quickly how these things can spread. And I think that's why we need to do far more in terms of moderation on the big social platforms. These social platforms play a key role in our democracy and in our democratic debate. And I think it is a very big mistake to leave them in so few hands as they are now, particularly very politicized hands with clear links to far-right politics, such as X and Twitter.
The Prime Minister has stressed that authorities are watching activity on social media closely, and rioters will face consequences swiftly. What power does the government have to clamp down on these individuals? How effective have measures been so far?
Well, I think clamping down on individuals has a part to play, but I think what we need really, I think, is to tackle the way social media has gone rogue. And I think what you need to do is really go to the top. I think arresting a few individuals will not stop the spread of misinformation, will not stop the spread of far right politics. I think it needs to go to the top. I think it needs to go to the top of social media platforms, but it also needs to go to the top of our governments, of our mainstream media as well. And we really need to shift the discourse away from these really, really toxic ideas, which do no good to no one, really.
And just lastly, how concerned are you about the violence and unrest, and really how quickly it's all escalated, and what do you foresee in the coming days?
Look, I'm concerned. As I said, I've been concerned for many years. It's not something that has entirely surprised me, although how quick and violent it turned is extremely scary, of course. What is, I think, heartening is to see what happened yesterday, where thousands of people, of ordinary people, very diverse crowds turned up to say, this is not the UK. This is not the UK we know, and we will not let this happen. And honestly, this is really, really heartwarming. I think, the people who have created this havoc are a tiny minority. The people who really believe in these ideas are a minority as well. What we have a responsibility to is to not let these ideas spread further than this small minority. We need to counter them on the street. We need to counter them in our media. We need to counter them in our politics. And I think at the moment, the only people who are taking responsibility for this are the people who have been in the streets. I think we need our elite to, I think, wake up to the threat now.
Dr. Aurelien Mondon, thank you so much for talking to us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.